The sun mercilessly beat down on the asphalt of Interstate 10, creating ripples on the horizon that made the landscape dance like a shattered mirror. Inside his latest model armored Mercedes, Edward Thompson absent-mindedly observed the orange, dunes stretching as far as the eye could see across the Arizona countryside. The air conditioning struggled against the 100-degree heat displayed on the digital dashboard, while his thoughts wandered as aimlessly as his destination on that Sunday afternoon. At 45, Edward had achieved everything money could buy. His fortune, estimated at several billion, was the result of years dedicated to developing revolutionary technologies in sustainable energy. But his professional success stood in stark contrast to the emptiness he carried within. His 50-room mansion, located in an ultra-exclusive gated community on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., was occupied only by him and a small team of staff, who kept everything running with military precision. "Sir, would you like me to take over driving?" The voice of Ryan, his personal driver who accompanied him in another car, came through the internal communication system. Edward hadn't even realized he had been driving for over 4 hours. "No, Ryan. Maintain the usual distance. I need to think for a bit." The truth was, Edward hadn't been able to sleep for days. The memories of his childhood, which he had worked so hard to lock away in some dark corner of his mind, had been surfacing more frequently lately. The empty mansion only amplified the sense of loneliness that had haunted him since he was 12, when his life had changed drastically. It was then that something unusual caught his attention. A small dark spot contrasted with the intense yellow of the landscape. At first, he thought it was just another mirage created by the heat on the asphalt, but as he got closer, the silhouette took shape. It was a child. Edward slowed down, his heart racing involuntarily. The staggering figure by the side of the road couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Their dark hair was covered in dust, and their clothes, though of good quality, were dirty and crumpled. "Ryan, are you seeing what I'm seeing?" "Yes, sir. Should I alert the authorities?" Edward had already stopped the car. Something about that scene kept him from simply driving on. The girl raised her face as he stepped out of the vehicle, and their eyes met. There was something familiar in those brown eyes, a mix of fear and helplessness that he knew all too. "Well, are you okay?" Edward asked, approaching cautiously so as not to scare her. The child didn't respond. Her legs trembled, and she would have fallen if Edward hadn't moved quickly to catch her. In his arms, she weighed less than she should, and her skin was too hot to the touch. "Ryan, grab some water and the first aid kit, quick." As his driver rushed to fulfill the request, Edward carried the girl to the shade of his car. She didn't resist, perhaps too weak to do so. Her eyes, though half closed, never left his, as if trying to decide whether she could trust him. "What's your name?" Edward tried again as Ryan arrived with a bottle of water. The girl drank eagerly when he offered it, but remained silent. "Sir, there's a hospital about 60 miles from here," Ryan informed, checking the GPS. Edward looked down the deserted road in both directions. There was no sign of other cars or anyone searching for a lost child. The decision he made in that moment would change his life forever, though he didn't know it yet. "No. Let's take her home. She needs immediate care, and my private doctor can get there faster than we could reach the hospital." He turned to the girl, who was now clutching the empty water bottle tightly against her chest. "Do you want to come with me? I promise I'll take care of you and find your family." It was the first time he saw something other than fear in her eyes, a small spark of hope perhaps. The girl made an almost imperceptible nod, which Edward interpreted as consent. Carefully, he settled her into the back seat of his Mercedes. The air conditioning seemed to revive her slightly, and her eyes began to wander curiously over the luxurious interior of the vehicle. Edward couldn't explain it, but something about this mysterious child stirred feelings in him that had long been buried under layers of self-imposed isolation. "Ryan, let Rachel know to prepare one of the guest rooms and call Dr. Paul urgently." Edward gave the order as he made a U-turn on the highway. His mind, usually so focused on numbers and business, was now filled with questions about the silent little passenger in his back seat. As he drove back home, Edward couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror every few minutes. The girl had curled up on the Italian leather seat, her eyes now fixed on the landscape passing by the window. Who was she? How had she ended up alone in the middle of the desert? And why did he feel that this encounter was no mere coincidence? The Thompson mansion emerged on the horizon like a giant of glass and concrete, its modern lines contrasting with the native vegetation of the surrounding savannah. When the main gate opened automatically, Edward noticed the girl straighten up in her seat, her eyes wide at the magnitude of the property. Rachel, the housekeeper who had worked for Edward for over a decade, was already waiting at the main entrance. Her usually serene face showed surprise at the sight of the child, but years of professional discretion kept her from making any comment. "The room is ready, sir, and Dr. Paul will arrive in approximately 20 minutes. Edward led the girl through the hallways decorated with contemporary art. She walked slowly, as if each step required extraordinary effort, but her eyes scanned every detail of the surroundings with a curiosity that seemed greater than her, fatigue. The room prepared by Rachel was a spacious suite in shades of blue and white, with a privileged view of the mansion's gardens. On the king-size bed, the housekeeper had laid out a set of clean clothes that belonged to her granddaughter, who occasionally visited. "Would you like to take a bath?" Edward asked gently. "Rachel can help you." The girl looked at the housekeeper and then at Edward, biting her lower lip in a nervous gesture. Finally, she nodded. "Great. I'll be right outside if you need anything." While Rachel helped the child with the bath, Edward remained in the hallway, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. What should he do? Contacting the authorities seemed like the right procedure, but something made him hesitate. The look of fear in the girl's eyes when he found her suggested there was more to the story than just a lost child. Dr. Paul arrived promptly, carrying his medical bag. He was a middle-aged man who had been attending to the Thompson family for years and was well acquainted with Edward's reserved temperament. "So, where is our little patient?" he asked, after hearing a brief account of the situation. The girl was already clean and dressed when they entered the room. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she looked even smaller in the borrowed clothes. Her black hair, now free from the desert dust, formed delicate curls that framed her face. The medical examination revealed moderate dehydration and some minor abrasions, but nothing that warranted immediate concern. Dr. Paul maintained a gentle tone throughout the procedure, asking simple questions that the girl answered only with gestures. "Physically, she will be fine with a few days of rest and proper nutrition," the doctor informed Edward in private. "But the selective mutism she's displaying could be indicative of psychological trauma. It would be wise to consult a specialist." After the doctor left, Rachel brought a tray of homemade soup and fresh bread. To Edward's surprise, the girl ate with appetite, though still maintaining absolute silence. "I think we need to give you a name, even if it's temporary," Edward remarked, sitting in an armchair near the bed. "How about Sophia?" The suggestion made the girl look up from her soup for the first time. There was something in her gaze, a glimmer of recognition perhaps, that made Edward lean forward, intrigued. "Do you like that name?" She nodded, and Edward could have sworn he saw a small smile form at the corner of her lips. "Then Sophia it will be for now." That night, after Sophia fell asleep, Edward met with his security team. He needed to take action, but he wanted to do it the right way. "George, I want you to contact our best private investigators. We need to find out who this girl is and what happened to her, but everything must be done with the utmost discretion." The head of security nodded, already making notes on his tablet. "And what about the authorities, sir?" Edward ran his hand through his graying hair, a gesture that revealed his unease. "For now, we'll conduct our own investigation. Something tells me we need to understand the situation better before involving third parties." Later, in his office, Edward found himself reviewing the security cameras that monitored Sophia's room. The girl was sound asleep, her steady breath gently moving the blanket. There was something about her that stirred his protective instincts in a way he couldn't explain. Opening a drawer in his desk, Edward took out an old picture frame. In the photo, a boy of about 12 smiled next to a couple. It was the last picture he had with his parents, taken weeks before the accident that changed his life forever. The boy in the photo had the same frightened eyes he had seen in Sophia that afternoon. "Who hurt you, little one?" he murmured to himself, watching the monitor screen. "And why do I feel our meeting wasn't by chance?" A movement on the screen caught his attention. Sophia had sat up in bed, her eyes wide open, fixed on some point on the wall. Her hands moved in the air as if drawing something invisible. Edward leaned closer to the monitor, intrigued. What did those gestures mean? What secrets did this mysterious child hold? The first week at the mansion passed at its own pace, silently established between Edward and Sophia. The girl still hadn't uttered a word, but her body language began to change subtly. The frightened looks were gradually replaced by a growing curiosity about her new surroundings. Rachel was the first to notice the small transformations. During breakfast on the third day, he found Sophia sitting on the kitchen stool, watching intently as she prepared pancakes. The housekeeper began to hum an old lullaby, and for the first time, he saw a genuine smile light up the girl's face. "How you need to see this," Rachel discreetly called Edward that afternoon, leading him to the library. There, seated on one of the large leather sofas, Sophia was completely absorbed in a stack of art books. Her small hands gently traced the pages, lingering especially on the reproductions of Van Gogh. Beside her, dozens of sheets of paper were covered with pencil drawings, surprisingly detailed for someone so young. Edward approached quietly, marveling at the girl's concentration. In one of the drawings, he recognized the desert landscape where he had found her, but there was something different. On the horizon, a shadowy figure observed the scene. The drawing sent an involuntary shiver down Edward's spine. "Your drawings are very beautiful," he commented softly so as not to startle her. Sophia looked up, hesitant at first, but then she picked up one of the papers and handed it to Edward. It was a portrait of him, captured with striking accuracy. In the drawing, his usually serious face bore a gentle expression that he barely recognized in himself. "This is extraordinary," Edward murmured, genuinely impressed. "You have a special gift, Sophia." It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. Sophia stood up, went to one of the shelves, and pointed to a specific book on the highest shelf. Edward reached it for her. It was an album of old photographs. The girl began flipping through it urgently until she found a particular photo. Edward, at 12 years old, sitting at the piano with his mother. "How did you—" Edward couldn't finish the question. Sophia began gesturing, pointing to the piano in the photo and then toward the library door. Understanding the silent request, Edward led her to the music room, a space that had remained closed for years. The grand Steinway piano occupied the center of the room, covered in a thin layer of dust. Sophia ran her fingers over the keys, producing random notes that echoed through the room. "My mother was a pianist," Edward explained, sitting on the bench. "She used to hold benefit concerts right here in this room." His hands automatically found the keys, and the first notes of Clair de Lune filled the air. Sophia sat beside him, her eyes fixed on his fingers as they danced across the keyboard. When the music ended, Edward noticed tears in the girl's eyes. That evening, during dinner, Sophia did something that surprised everyone. Using the utensils as imaginary pencils, she began to draw in the air, repeating the gestures Edward had seen through the security cameras. Her movements were precise, as if she were transcribing a memory. "Do you want some art supplies?" Edward asked, and her face lit up. In less than an hour, George returned with a professional art set: pencils, brushes, paints, and a variety of papers. Sophia attacked the materials with an urgency that suggested more than just artistic enthusiasm. It was as if she needed to communicate something important through her creations. The drawings that emerged that night were different from the previous ones, darker, more complex. In one, a large house appeared shrouded in shadows, with indistinct figures in the windows. In another, a car traveled down a dark road. Edward carefully stored each drawing, sensing that they might hold clues about Sophia's past. Meanwhile, in his office, George presented the initial findings of the investigation. "There are no records of missing children matching her description in the past few months, sir. Not in the District of Columbia nor in the neighboring states. It's as if she appeared out of nowhere." Edward furrowed his brow, concerned. "Expand the search. Check private schools, art teachers, anything that might give us a clue about her origins." Later, during his usual nightly rounds through the mansion, Edward stopped in front of Sophia's room. The door was slightly ajar, and he could see the girl sleeping peacefully, surrounded by her drawings. Beside the bed, a new portrait caught his attention. In it, Edward was playing the piano while a female figure, who bore a striking resemblance to his late mother, watched the scene with a smile. How could Sophia know so many details about his past? And why did her drawings seem to alternate between sweet and dark memories? Edward had a growing sense that he was facing a much larger mystery than he had initially imagined. The routine at the Thompson mansion had found a new rhythm in recent days. Mornings began with Sophia drawing during breakfast, while Edward answered emails on his tablet, occasionally glancing at the girl who now filled his world with color. Afternoons were dedicated to walks in the gardens or piano sessions in the music room, which had come back to life after years of silence. That particular morning, however, something disrupted the newfound peace. Edward was in his office when George entered, his expression more serious than usual. "Sir, we found something you need to see." On the computer screen, security camera footage showed a black luxury car stopping at a gas station about 50 kilometers from where Edward had found Sophia. In the video, dated 2 weeks prior, a girl with the same physical characteristics as her stepped out of the vehicle, accompanied by a well-dressed couple. "We managed to identify the license plate," George continued. "The car was registered under the names Robert and Helen Wilson, hotel industry entrepreneurs in Chicago. But there's something strange. The car was found abandoned near the border with Mexico 3 days later." Edward felt a chill run down his spine. "And the couple?" "No sign of them since then. There were no records of leaving the country, nor any bank transactions. It's as if they had vanished." Before Edward could fully process this information, Rachel appeared at the office door, her expression worried. "Mr. Edward, you need to see this." In the makeshift studio they had set up for Sophia, dozens of new drawings covered the walls. Unlike her previous works, these seemed to tell a specific story. In one, a black car identical to the one in the security footage. In another, a luxurious hotel with the name Wilson Palace on the facade. The most unsettling, however, was a portrait of the couple from the video, their faces captured with eerie precision. "She's been drawing non-stop for hours," Rachel explained. "I've never seen her so agitated." Sophia was sitting on the floor, surrounded by papers and colored pencils. Her hands moved frantically over a new sheet, shaping a scene that made Edward freeze. It was the exact reproduction of the gas station where the car had stopped. "Sophia," Edward called softly, kneeling beside her. "Do you know these people?" The girl stopped drawing, her eyes filling with tears. Slowly, she picked up another drawing from the floor. On it, the same couple appeared in a dark office, surrounded by papers, with expressions of despair on their faces. "Are they your parents?" Sophia shook her head vehemently, a gesture so abrupt it surprised everyone. She grabbed another drawing. In it, a female figure held her hand in a hospital room. The woman was not Helen Wilson. Edward's mind raced with the implications of these discoveries. If Robert and Helen weren't Sophia's parents, what was their relationship to her? And why had they disappeared? "George," Edward called his head of security, "I want everything. You can find about the Wilsons, business records, family connections, especially anything related to hospitals in recent years." That night, Edward couldn't sleep. The pieces of the puzzle refused to fit together. On his tablet, he researched the Wilson Palace Hotel, a luxurious venture that, according to recent news, was facing serious financial troubles. A noise in the hallway interrupted his thoughts. Through the security cameras, he saw Sophia sleepwalking toward the music room. Concerned, he went there. The girl was sitting at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys without touching them. When Edward approached, she turned to him with her eyes open, but her gaze was distant, as if in a trance. "Sophia, are you okay?" In response, she began, making gestures in the air, as if typing on an invisible keyboard. Edward recognized a pattern. They were numbers, repeated several times. Quickly, he grabbed his phone and wrote down the sequence, 240819. Sophia blinked several times, seeming to awaken from her altered state. She looked confused at Edward, as if she didn't know how she had gotten there. "It's okay," he reassured her, wrapping her in a protective hug. "Let's go back to bed." After settling Sophia in her room, Edward returned to his office with the sequence of numbers hammering in his mind. Something about those digits seemed familiar. August 24, 2019, he murmured to himself. The date sparked a memory. It was the day his major sustainable energy project had been approved, securing $1 billion contract with the federal government. But what could be the connection between that date, the Wilsons, and Sophia? An urgent email from George interrupted his thoughts. "Sir, we found something in the hospital records. You need to see this immediately." Edward opened the attachment and his heart nearly stopped. On the screen, an old medical record showed the photo of a young woman, the same one from Sophia's drawing. The name on the file made his world spin. Marina Thompson, his younger sister, who everyone believed had died in the same accident that took their parents. Edward spent the entire night poring over the documents sent by George. Each new page revealed a fragment of a story he had never imagined possible. Marina had not only survived the accident, but had lived for years under special protection in a private clinic in Chicago. "How did I not know about this?" he murmured repeatedly, his hands trembling as he turned each page of the report. According to the records, Marina had remained in a vegetative state for nearly a year after the accident. When she finally woke up, her memory was severely impaired. The sun was beginning to rise when Edward found something even more disturbing. Records of frequent visits by Robert and Helen Wilson to the clinic over the past few years. The dates coincided with significant financial movements in the couple's accounts. "Sir?" Rachel gently knocked on the office door. "Sophia is asking." "For you, she seems upset." In the girls' room, Edward found a scene that made his heart ache. Sophia had covered all the walls with new drawings, connected like a large mural. In the center, the figure of Marina appeared repeatedly, always near a hospital bed. In one of the images, Robert Wilson was handing an envelope to a man in a white coat. "Sophia," Edward knelt beside her as she continued to draw frantically. "Did you know this woman, Marina?" The girl stopped, her eyes filling with tears. Slowly, she picked up a different drawing. This one showed Marina holding a baby in her arms, while the Wilsons watched the scene from a distance. "My God," Edward whispered, understanding hitting him like a bolt of lightning. You're her daughter." Sophia nodded, and for the first time since arriving at the mansion, her voice emerged, small and trembling. "Mommy." Edward had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. Sophia's voice, so much like Marina's in childhood, brought back long-buried memories. His niece, Sophia, was his niece. "George," he called through the intercom, his voice betraying his emotion. "Gather the legal team immediately and keep tracking the Wilsons. We need to understand exactly what happened." Throughout the day, more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The legal team discovered that the Wilsons had gained custody of Sophia through questionable documents, taking advantage of Marina's weakened state. The couple was on the brink of bankruptcy and apparently had been using the situation to extort money from the clinic. "Sir," George hurried into the office late in the afternoon. "We just received information from our source at the hospital. Marina, she woke up from the induced coma 3 days ago." Eduardo felt the air escape his lungs. "What do you mean, induced coma? The records said she was in rehabilitation treatment." Apparently, the Wilsons were paying to keep her sedated. When the money ran out, the clinic began gradually reducing the medication. That's when they fled, with Sophia. The anger Eduardo felt at that moment was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't the explosive fury of business, but something cold and calculated. Someone had hurt his family. The sister he thought he had lost, the niece he barely knew, and they would pay for it. "Rachel," he called to the housekeeper, "pack a bag for Sophia. George, I want the helicopter ready in 15 minutes. "Are we going on a trip?" Sophia asked, her voice still hesitant but firmer. Eduardo knelt to be at her level. "We're going to see your mom, little one. It's time to bring her home." As they boarded the helicopter, Eduardo received another urgent message. The investigators had located the Wilsons. The couple was trying to negotiate tickets to Europe using fake documents. They won't get far, he murmured to himself, watching Sophia, who for the first time seemed genuinely excited, drawing the helicopter in her notebook. On the horizon, Chicago began to appear, its lights flickering on in the twilight. Somewhere in that concrete jungle, Marina was waiting, finally free from the drugs that had kept her prisoner for so long. Eduardo didn't know how she would be, how much she would remember, but one thing was certain. His family was alive, and he would move heaven and earth to protect them now. St. Luke's Hospital stood imposingly against the night sky of Chicago, its windows glowing like small beacons in the darkness. Edward held Sophia's hand firmly as they walked through the sterile corridors of the private wing, his heart beating faster with every step. Dr. Matthew, the hospital's director, awaited them in his office. He was a middle-aged man with a weary expression, seemingly carrying the weight of many secrets. "Mr. Thompson," he began, nervously adjusting his tie, "before I take you to Marina, I need to prepare you. Your sister is conscious and lucid, but the recovery process is delicate. Her memories are gradually returning." "Does she remember Sophia?" Edward asked, feeling the girl squeeze his hand tighter. "Yes, that was one of the first signs that the medication was wearing off. She started calling for her daughter in her sleep, days before fully waking up." Sophia let go of Edward's hand and grabbed her sketchpad. With quick, precise strokes, she drew the room where her mother was being kept. The details were astonishing, from the number of medication tubes to the pattern of the curtains. Dr. Matthew paled as he saw the drawing. "How did she—" "Sophia has a special gift," Edward interrupted, not wanting to prolong the conversation. "Can we see Marina now?" The doctor led them to room 405. Before opening the door, Edward knelt in front of his niece. "Are you ready, little one?" Sophia nodded, her eyes shining with anticipation. As the door opened, time seemed to freeze. Marina was sitting by the window, watching the city lights. At 35, she still maintained the delicate beauty Edward remembered from their teenage years. Her long black hair, identical to Sophia's, was tied in a loose braid. "Murray!" Edward's voice faltered. She turned slowly, her eyes filling with tears as she recognized her brother. But it was when her gaze met Sophia that her emotions overflowed. "My girl," she whispered, opening her arms. Sophia ran into her mother's embrace, and the sound of her sobs filled the room. Marina held her tightly, as if fearing her daughter might disappear again. "Forgive me," she murmured through tears. "Forgive me for not being strong enough to protect you." Edward watched the scene leaning against the wall, his own vision blurred by emotion. Fragments of childhood memories danced in his mind, Marina playing the piano, laughing at his lame jokes, making plans for the future. "Ed," Marina called, reaching a hand toward him. "My brother, you found her. You brought her back to me." He stepped closer, wrapping both of them in a protective hug. For a few moments, the painful past seemed to dissipate, replaced by the joy of reunion. But the peace was interrupted when George appeared at the door, his expression grave. "Sir, we need to talk. It's urgent." In the hallway, George showed security camera footage on his tablet. Robert and Helen Wilson had been seen entering a law firm specializing in international law. They hired Benjamin Adams, George informed. He's one of the most aggressive lawyers in the country when it comes to custody cases. Edward felt his blood run cold. "They can't be thinking of—" "They've already filed for emergency custody," George confirmed. "They're claiming that Sophia was kidnapped by you and that Marina is psychologically unfit to be a mother." Back in the room, Edward found a scene that broke his heart. Sophia was showing her drawings to Marina, who admired each one with alternating expressions of pride and pain. "This is Uncle Edward playing the piano," Sophia explained, her voice stronger and more confident in her mother's presence. "He plays just like you do in my memories." Marina looked at her brother, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You reopened the music room?" "Sophia helped me rediscover a lot of things," he replied, trying to hide his concern. Later, when Sophia finally fell asleep on the couch in the room, Marina called Edward over. "Something's wrong, isn't it? I can see it in your eyes." Edward hesitated, but he knew he couldn't hide the truth from his sister. As he explained the situation, he saw fear growing on Marina's face. "They can't take her," she whispered, clutching her brother's arm. "Ed, you don't understand. The Wilsons, they didn't just want money. There's something bigger behind all of this." "What are you talking about?" Marina looked at her sleeping daughter before responding, her voice barely above a whisper. "On the day of the accident, it wasn't an accident." The silence that followed Marina's revelation was as thick as fog. Edward pulled a chair closer to his sister's bed, his mind struggling to process the information. "What exactly do you remember?" he asked softly, mindful of Sophia sleeping nearby. Marina closed her eyes, as if searching for images in an old, blurry film. They're fragments mostly, but in the last few days since they stopped the medications, the memories have been coming back more clearly. "Dad had discovered something, Ed. Something related to the sustainable energy project you were developing at the time." Edward felt a chill run down his spine. The project in question had become the foundation of his current fortune, revolutionizing the country's energy sector. "On the night of the accident," Marina continued, her voice trembling slightly, "Dad was agitated. He had a meeting scheduled with someone important, but he didn't say who it was. I remember him putting a folder with documents in the car." A gentle movement interrupted the conversation. Sophia had shifted on the couch, murmuring something in her sleep. Marina reached out, stroking her daughter's hair with infinite tenderness. "The Wilsons," Edward resumed, keeping his voice low. "How did they get involved in this?" "Robert Wilson was a member of the board at the hospital where I was initially admitted. He was the one who arranged my transfer to the private clinic, claiming I would receive specialized treatment. At the time I was very confused, drifting in and out of consciousness. When I finally started to improve, they began the medication scheme." The door to the room opened silently, and George entered with a thick folder in hand. "Sir, we found something in the company's old archives. You need to see this." The documents revealed a complex web of business relationships. Robert Wilson, before his apparent bankruptcy, had been a minority partner in a competing company that had tried to buy Edward's project early on. "This doesn't make sense," Edward murmured, examining the papers. "Why keep you sedated all these years? What would they gain from that?" "The patent," Marina replied, her eyes lighting up with a sudden memory. "Dad discovered there was a flaw in the original patent documentation, something that could invalidate the entire registration process." Edward felt the weight of realization. If the patent were invalidated, his entire business empire could collapse. Thousands of jobs would be affected. Clean energy projects across the country would be halted. "The documents Dad had in the car that night disappeared after the accident," George finished. "They were never found." Sophia stirred on the couch again, this time opening her eyes. Without saying a word, she picked up her sketch pad and began working on something with intensity. "What is it, sweetheart?" Marina asked softly. The girl didn't respond immediately. Her fingers moved with precision over the paper, shaping a scene that made Edward freeze. It was the interior of an old car, the same car her parents had been in that fateful night. In the drawing, a brown briefcase was partially visible under the driver's seat. "Sophia," Edward approached carefully, "have you seen this briefcase before?" She nodded, flipping the page to reveal a new drawing. The Wilson office, with the same briefcase on a mahogany desk. "My God," Marina whispered. "She must have seen the documents when she was with them." As if responding to her mother's observation, Sophia began drawing numbers and letters. Edward recognized them immediately. They were patent registration codes. "George," he called urgently, "I need to verify these numbers, and call Dr. Matthew here immediately." The doctor arrived within minutes, his face a mask of concern. "Doctor," Edward began, his voice heavy with authority, "I need the truth. Who else was involved in the scheme to keep my sister sedated?" Dr. Matthew paled, his gaze shifting between Edward and Marina. I was just following orders. The hospital board." "The same board Robert Wilson was part of?" The doctor nodded, miserably. He had documents, evidence of irregularities at the hospital. He kept us under control with threats of exposure. A sharp beep interrupted the confession. George checked his phone, his eyes widening. "Sir, the Wilsons have just filed for an injunction. They are coming to the hospital with court officers. They claim to have documents proving they are the legal guardians of Sophia." Edward stood up, a dangerous calm in his voice. "Dr. Matthew, now is your chance to do the right thing. Will you help us?" The doctor looked at Sophia, who was now in Marina's arms, and then at the years of complicity in illegal schemes that weighed on his conscience. "Give me an hour," he finally replied. "I have all the records of the Wilsons' illegal activities stored in a safe place. It was my insurance, it's my protection." "Enough time," Edward nodded, already typing on his phone. "George, activate our legal team. It's time to end this nightmare once and for all." The corridors of St. Luke's Hospital, usually quiet at that time of night, buzzed with restrained activity. Edward had discreetly positioned his security team at strategic points, while Dr. Matthew coordinated Marina's transfer to a more secluded wing of the hospital. "The documents are all here," the doctor explained, handing a flash drive to Edward. Records of irregular payments, incriminating emails, Marina's falsified medical records, everything. Sophia watched the commotion with attentive eyes, sitting on the bed next to her mother, her sketch pad on her lap. Her fingers moved quickly across the paper, capturing the tension of the moment in precise strokes. "They're here," George announced over the communicator. Robert and Helen Wilson, accompanied by 2 lawyers and a court officer. Edward took a deep breath, adjusting his tie. "Showtime," he murmured, exchanging a meaningful glance with Marina. "Keep Sophia with you. No matter what happens, don't let anyone enter this room without my explicit permission." In the hospital lobby, Robert Wilson exuded a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Tall and imposing in his Italian suit, he could barely hide a triumphant smile as he saw Edward approach. "Mr. Thompson," the Wilsons' lawyer stepped forward, brandishing documents. "We have here a court order granting temporary custody of Sophia to my clients. We demand that the child be handed over immediately." Edward kept his expression neutral. "Lawyer?" "Dr. Benjamin Adams," the man replied pompously. "Dr. Benjamin, I believe we have a problem here. Your clients have committed numerous crimes, including fraud, falsification of medical records, and, most seriously, conspiracy related to an attack on my family years ago." Helen Wilson visibly paled, but Robert maintained his composure. "What nonsense is this? We came here with a legitimate court order. Based on fraudulent documents," the voice of Dr. Beatrice, Edward's lawyer, rang out firmly as she emerged from a side corridor. "And we have proof." In the protected room, Sophia continued to draw frantically. Marina watched in awe as her daughter brought to life a sequence of images that seemed to tell a complete story. "Mom, look," Sophia pointed to one of the drawings, finding her voice with more confidence. "This is the day they took Grandpa's papers." The drawing depicted, with striking detail, Robert Wilson retrieving a brown folder from a hidden compartment in his office. In the next image, he appeared in a meeting with other shadowy figures, the folder open on the table revealing documents bearing the logo of Edward's company. Back in the lobby, the confrontation reached its peak. "You kept Marina Thompson illegally. Sedated for years," Dr. Beatrice continued, her voice sharp as steel, "all to prevent her from revealing what she knew about the true cause of the accident that claimed her parents' lives." "This is ridiculous," Robert shouted, but his hands trembled slightly. "Dr. Matthew has provided complete documentation of the scheme," Edward interjected, his voice dangerously calm, "including payment records and communications that prove your involvement in a much larger conspiracy." Helen Wilson suddenly staggered, leaning against a wall. "Robert, it's over," she murmured. I can't keep going with this." The bailiff, who had been watching the scene with growing discomfort, cleared his throat. "If there is evidence of criminal activity, I must report." "No," Robert screamed, his veneer of sophistication finally cracking. "You don't understand. Those documents, that patent, it was our last chance. Our company was going bankrupt. Everything we had built was crumbling. So you decided to try to steal my project," Edward finished, and when my father found out, it was his idea. Helen pointed at her husband, tears streaming down her face. He planned it all. I only found out later, when it was already too late. Robert Wilson collapsed into a chair, all his arrogance evaporating like mist under the sun. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. The plan was just to damage the brakes, cause a small accident, recover the documents in the chaos. The silence that followed his confession was deafening. Dr. Benjamin Adams discreetly gathered his documents, signaling to his assistant that it was time to leave. "George," Edward called calmly, "please escort the Wilsons. I'm sure the police officers who just arrived would love to hear this story in detail." As Robert and Helen were escorted out, Edward received an urgent message from Marina. "You need to see this." Sophia drew everything. In the room, the walls were covered with a complex visual narrative, a story of greed, betrayal, and secrets kept for years, told through the eyes of an extraordinary child. "How did she know all this?" Edward asked, amazed. Marina hugged her daughter tightly. "Sophia has always had a special gift. She sees things, Ed. Things that happened in the past, memories that have been imprinted on places and people." "What now?" Sophia asked, her voice small but firm. "Can we go home?" Edward smiled, sitting down beside the two. "Yes, little one. Now we can all go home." Chapter 9. New Beginnings. The Thompson mansion came to life in the weeks that followed. The once silent hallways now echoed with laughter and music. Marina occupied one of the main suites, next to Sophia's room, which had been completely transformed into a youthful art studio, with walls painted in soft shades of blue and shelves filled with art supplies. On a particularly sunny morning, Edward watched from the balcony as Marina and Sophia explored the garden. His sister was still recovering physically. Years of forced medication had taken their toll, but each day her strength returned a little more. "Breakfast is served," Rachel announced, a genuine smile on her face. The housekeeper had taken on an almost maternal role with Marina, overseeing her recovery with tireless dedication. In the dining room, now always set for three, Sophia showed her mother her latest drawings. They were no longer the dark images of the past, but scenes full of color and hope, portraits of the family reunited, plans for redecorating the house, dreams of the future. "Look, Uncle Edward," she called, holding up a particular drawing. "This is what the music room will look like after the renovation." The child's design showed the restored piano, new curtains, and, what touched Edward the most, three figures sitting together on the piano bench. "Do you want to learn to play too?" Marina asked softly, stroking her daughter's hair. "I want to learn everything," Sophia replied with the determination only a child can have. "Music, art, and I want to understand Uncle Edward's business too." Edward nearly choked on his coffee. "The company?" "Yes," she continued, pulling another drawing from her folder. "I did some solar energy projects. Look at this." To the adult's surprise, the drawings revealed surprisingly sophisticated concepts for a child her age. Solar panels with innovative designs, elegantly simplified energy storage systems. "This is extraordinary," Edward murmured, examining the sketches with professional attention. "Sophia, do you understand what you've drawn here?" The girl shrugged with the simplicity of childhood. "I just see things in my head and draw them. Sometimes they're memories, other times they're ideas that come to me." Marina exchanged a meaningful glance with her brother. Sophia's gift went beyond the ability to capture the past. She seemed to have a natural intuition for innovation and design. Later that day, while Sophia had her first official piano lesson with her mother, Edward received important news in his office. "The conviction of the Wilsons is practically certain," Dr. Beatrice informed him via video conference. "The evidence is irrefutable, and Helen has decided to fully cooperate with the investigations. As for the patent, all documents have been validated. Your empire is secure, Edward." But Edward barely heard the good news. His gaze was fixed on the music room, visible through the glass doors of his office. Marina played a soft melody while Sophia watched her hands intently, occasionally playing a few notes herself. "Beatrice," he gently interrupted, "could you prepare some additional documents for me?" I want to start the process of transferring part of the company's shares to a trust fund in Sophia's name. Are you sure? It's a significant decision. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, he replied, smiling as he watched Sophia attempt to mimic a particularly complex chord. That girl is the future of the Thompson Company. And more importantly, she is the future of our family. That evening during dinner, Sophia surprised everyone by playing a simplified version of Clair de Lune, the same piece Edward had played on her first day at the mansion. How did you learn it so quickly? Marina asked, amazed. The music was always here, Sophia replied, touching her chest. Like the drawings, I just needed to find the way to let it out. Later, when Sophia was already asleep, Marina found Edward in the library, reviewing some of his niece's technical drawings. She's special, isn't she? Marina commented, sitting beside her brother. Extraordinary, Edward corrected, and not just because of her talents. Sophia brought us back to life, Murray. She made us a family again. Marina picked up one of the drawings, a portrait of the three of them together in the garden. You know what's most amazing? She drew this weeks before you found her in the desert, as if, somehow, she knew she would find her way to us. Edward smiled, remembering that day on the road. What seemed like a coincidence now revealed itself as something much deeper, a predestined encounter that had healed old wounds and paved the way for a future none of them had imagined possible. 5 years had passed since that fateful meeting in the desert. The Thompson mansion, once a symbol of isolation, had transformed into a vibrant and welcoming home. The garden, now filled with colorful sculptures created by Sophia, told the story of this transformation in every renewed flower bed. On her 15th birthday, Sophia stood at the center of the main auditorium of the Thompson Foundation for Technology and Arts, inaugurated especially on that date. The space brought together two of the teenagers' greatest passions: technological innovation and artistic expression. The walls of the lobby displayed an exhibition of her latest works, a series of paintings that blended traditional art with projections of sustainable energy. Impressive, isn't it? Edward commented to Marina, watching the guests marvel at their niece's creations. She managed to turn complex technical concepts into something everyone can understand and appreciate. Marina, now fully recovered and leading the cultural division of the foundation, smiled with pride. Sophia has always had this gift of seeing beyond appearances. She doesn't just see the past and the present. She can visualize possibilities no one else imagines. On the main stage, Sophia prepared for her performance. Her fingers, as skilled with brushes as they were with mathematical calculations, glided smoothly over the piano keys, beginning an original composition. The music, like her paintings, told a story. The story of her family, of loss and reunion, of pain transformed into hope. As she played, images were projected on the screen behind her, her own digitally animated drawings showing the evolution of the sustainable energy projects she had developed with her uncle. The most recent of these, a revolutionary solar capture system inspired by the structure of sunflower petals, was already in the implementation phase in underserved communities across the country. In the front row, Rachel discreetly wiped away tears. The housekeeper, who had become an indispensable part of the family, held a photo album documenting every important moment of the past 5 years, from Sophia's first genuine smile to her first piano recital, from Marina's return to music, to the Sunday mornings when the three of them gathered to play together. After the performance, during the reception, Edward took the stage for a special announcement. "Today we don't just celebrate Sophia's birthday," he began, his voice filled with emotion. "We celebrate the transformative power of family love and our ability to reinvent our destiny. This foundation was born from the dream of a girl who, through her art and unique sensitivity, taught us to see the world through different eyes." Sophia joined her uncle on stage, followed by Marina. The three of them together represented not only the union of a blended family, but also the promise of a future where technology and humanity walked hand in hand. "The Advanced Research Institute of the Foundation," Edward continued, "will be led by a young visionary who at just 15 has already revolutionized the way we think about sustainable energy. "Sophia, my dear niece, the future is yours." The applause was interrupted when Sophia took the microphone, surprising everyone. "5 years ago," she began, her voice clear and confident, "I was lost in a desert, not just physically, but emotionally. Today, thanks to the love of my Uncle Edward and the reunion with my mother, I've discovered that our most special gifts flourish when we have strong roots to support us." Turning to a digital screen, Sophia made a gesture, and an image appeared, one of her earliest drawings at the mansion, showing 3 figures at the piano. Beside it, a recent photo showed the same scene, now real. "Some call my ability to see beyond the ordinary a gift or extraordinary talent, but my true gift was finding my family. It was learning that the past doesn't have to haunt us. It can teach us, strengthen us, and inspire us to build a better future." In the middle of the audience, Dr. Matthew, now the director of a free healthcare program funded by the foundation, smiled, remembering how that story could have taken a very different turn. After the ceremony, the family gathered in the mansion's music room as they did every evening. Sophia sat at the piano, but this time she pulled out a new drawing from her folder. "Look what I saw this morning," she said, showing the image to the two of them. The drawing depicted the mansion's garden, but a few years into the future. In it, children played among colorful sculptures, while music and art classes took place outdoors. The foundation had expanded, transforming the property into a space for learning and creativity. "Is this how it's going to be?" Marina asked, hugging her daughter. "This is how it can be," Sophia replied, smiling. "The future isn't set in stone. He is like a blank canvas waiting to be painted with the colors we choose." Edward observed the two of them, feeling a deep gratitude for the fate that had brought them together. The emptiness that once filled that house had been replaced not only with love and music, but with purpose and hope. Sophia began to play a new melody, one none of them had heard before. The notes seemed to dance in the air, carrying promises of a bright tomorrow. "Where will this music take us?" Edward asked, sitting down beside his niece. Sophia smiled, her fingers continuing the melody. "To the future, Uncle Edward. A future we will build together, note by note, color by color, dream by dream." And so, in the room that had once witnessed so much loneliness, the music continued, echoing the truth Sophia had always known. That the greatest gift of all is the ability to love and be loved, to turn pain into beauty, and to see, even in the deepest darkness, the promise of the light to come.